Finally, I would mention as one of these key issues, although parties are being encouraged to do more to build confidence among voters, we all know that parties have very little faith among the voting public. The candidate and campaign regulations that are put in place continue to become more and more restrictive. Campaign rules provide for a very short 13-day campaign period, which was reduced from 15 days in the past. And candidate registration takes place only 1 week before the campaign begins. In fact, the cutoff for submitting your candidacy is only 12 hours before the campaign begins. So what this does is it means that candidates and parties have not built the support and the public awareness and have a very short period to be able to do that, which means they don't have an incentive to build as much of a program. All of these points have been raised by the past by various actors, political parties, civil society, domestic monitors, international observers. And while they may seem technical by their very nature, they are extremely political because they define the rules of the game and determine if the playing field is level, which is at the heart of what I think the reform process was about. The decision to change them, and maybe even more, the willingness to have an open debate and an honest debate about these things is really based on the amount of real political will that is available. And because of that, it will be the decision to address electoral issues will be a demonstration to the public over the government's willingness to really engage in real reform. This is the fundamental issue about the 2011 elections from our perspective. It's less about who did or didn't win or who won how many seats. It's more about whether people feel the electoral process was significantly tied to reform, because elections are one of the most visible elements that people have for the sense of reform. And perhaps more telling than the preparations, or perhaps more telling for all of us in this regard than the technical aspects, were the preparations. Obviously, the elections came 1 year earlier than they were originally scheduled for, and people were still very much in the mentality of the referendum and the July reform process. And that meant that there was very little time to make the necessary revisions to the underlying organizational laws. I think the public understands that, but what they saw was a process that unfolded that reminded them that things were going to stay the same. The Ministry of Interior presented a hard copy of the draft laws to political party leaders only and made that available to them for only a few days before asking for feedback. Unfortunately, in a first test of whether Parliament and parties would really step forward to exert themselves, there were very few changes made to the electoral framework by legislators or proposed by parties. Most parties, in fairness, were unable to move so quickly to organize internal debate, let alone have consultations with constituents. Neither the government nor Parliament had sponsored public hearings, which meant civil society, who had many opinions on this, had very, very few opportunities to share their views. And so, and during the voting, as we all know, a significant number of parliamentarians were absent when these laws were passed. So, in essence, even if the public isn't able to follow all of the details of the legislative process or legal elements, they had the feeling that things were going to be the same. And I would argue that perception, in the case of the past year, is at least as important as the details. Despite these deficits and challenges, I'm an optimist by nature, but I would say that there are opportunities here to allow elections to add credibility to the reform process. So if Election Day is being used as a measure of public confidence, there can be some changes to the regulatory framework that can instill greater appreciation among the public and build goodwill. And sometimes it's those little things that matter in building goodwill to address some of the bigger, deeper issues. As a simple example, the Ministry of Interior has still not released detailed election results.
Never.
Including the invalid ballot rates and vote counts for parties across the country or even by region. Now, obviously, the country has moved on with the formation of the government and a finance law and all these things. So that those details are not going to matter as much in disputes. However, they're a sign of the willingness of the ministry to turn the page and take a new approach. We know that the ministry has the capacity because in 2007 and 2009, such information was provided within a week of election days. So it's more a question among the people of where is the commitment of the government to change, and where is the commitment of political elites in protecting public interest. It's not so much about the details, it's about where this fits into the process. Are the elites demanding this information to show the public that they're concerned about public interest? So a few other areas to wrap up where I think that there are some steps that could be taken. Some are big, some are smaller, that could promote this confidence. Ultimately, from the big, I would say the process of how these deliberations happen is as important. And therefore, I would suggest that there needs to be continued public dialogue. It needs to include representatives from across the spectrum, from the palace, from the government, from political parties, the press, academia, civil society, and in fact, the Moroccan people, to have an opportunity to talk about some of these questions. At a minimum, these discussions should at least be transparent and the decisions publicized so that people can understand and gain more trust in the process and the government. Among these discussions needs to be a debate about the electoral system, as I mentioned, and the electoral map. Whether there's a more constructive electoral system that addresses Morocco's governance priorities right now, and so that there's a demographic balance within electoral districts. And I want to say there are no right or wrong answers here, and I'm not proposing one over the other. The point is that there should be a dialogue and a discussion to determine these, and it should be a deliberative, transparent process. The Moroccan government should explore the feasibility of an independent election commission. These commissions are becoming more and more common in places where there's a need to build confidence around the world. And empowering such a body as a neutral actor could go a long way to address public skepticism over administration. As I mentioned, even though the elections were administered from our perspective neutrally, the question isn't so much what we think, it's what the Moroccan public thinks. The Moroccan government might amend the electoral code to allow political parties and citizens to audit the voter list, have access to that before the elections, to build confidence that who is going to vote are real people. This is a common feature across not only the country but the region now, and I think Morocco needs to consider this in terms of international standards. Using the national identification card for voting was very positive. Perhaps using that system as a way for a passive registration process is an important way to encourage and make it easier for Moroccans to go vote. Ministry of Interior officials said to us they couldn't do that because that would be forcing people to go to vote. But enabling people to go to vote, making it easier for them because they register more easily, is not the same as making them go to vote. So this is a very common feature. Another small item, they might consider the practice of burning valid ballots the moment that the count ends. Now, this is a minor issue for some. It's intended to discourage vote rigging at later, that more ballots are added. But quite frankly, it sends the image to the people that there's manipulation going on, even if there isn't. And France is often referred to as the model for this practice, but it's important to note that France uses a very different ballot system, and the French people have confidence in the system so that they're comfortable with that. I mean, we saw over 80% turnout for the last elections. Contrast that with the turnout here, and we see the levels of confidence. And finally, I would consider extending the campaign period and the regulations around campaigning so that parties are actually encouraged to have platforms and do more about educating the public about elections, government, policies, rather than just trying to get people to go vote on election day for whomever. And there would be more effort then by parties, and parties play an important role in this. It's not just the authorities. Parties need to be there, mobilizing people, doing outreach regularly and consistently to make sure that people are aware of their rights, are aware of why they should vote, and how parties are different. So, in conclusion, if municipal and regional elections go forward this year as are currently speculated, many of these larger points may not be able to be addressed quickly. However, a number of the small points could be addressed in a good faith effort, and they wouldn't be too difficult, and they could happen quite quickly. And so I would suggest it's obvious, I think it would be greatly appreciated by citizens. It's obvious that a significant segment of the population believes in the ballot box and in elections as an important avenue. But they need more assurances that going to the ballot box is not a futile exercise, that it actually results in something meaningful. The amount of time that it took those 28% of voters to go register, find their polling station, show up on the day of the vote, and actually cast a ballot, even if it was blank or they had written something on it, shows that they are seeking some way to channel their interests and communicate their political views, but they just don't believe that the system has caught up yet for that. As one citizen wrote on a ballot that one of our observers saw, there is no water in Morocco, and we are thirsty. And so when it comes to elections, people understand that there are challenges, but they're thirsty, and they want to at least see that wells are being dug, even if the water isn't being delivered yet. Thank you very much.